Most people think of Solomon as the wisest king to ever rule, a man blessed by God with knowledge beyond human comprehension. But what they don't tell you is that wisdom alone wasn't what made him powerful. There were secrets within his kingdom, hidden beyond the magnificence of his temple, the splendor of his palace, and the intoxicating influence of his harem. I learned this the hard way, the day I found myself standing beneath the ruins of what was once the heart of his empire. I had always been fascinated by history, but nothing could have prepared me for what I saw that day. It was supposed to be a simple study of the ancient stones, an attempt to understand the architectural genius of his temple. But what I uncovered made me question everything I thought I knew about him, about power, and about the forces that might have been at his command. The expedition had already been digging for weeks when we stumbled upon a section of the ruins that didn't match the rest of the structure. While the temple's remnants were meticulously documented, this particular chamber had no records, no mentions in any historical accounts. It was as if it wasn't supposed to exist. The deeper we dug, the stranger it became. The stones were darker, smoother, almost unnatural in their construction, as if something beyond human hands had shaped them. My colleagues dismissed it as a coincidence, an anomaly of time and erosion, but I felt it in my gut. This place held a secret, and I wasn't the only one who thought so. Our guide, a man who had spent his entire life in the city, refused to step any closer. "Some things should stay buried," he muttered before leaving us behind. I should have listened to him. We pushed forward, driven by curiosity and the weight of something unspoken in the air. As we cleared more debris, we uncovered carvings along the walls, symbols unlike anything we had seen before. These were not the typical Hebrew inscriptions found in the temple ruins, nor did they resemble any known Canaanite or Mesopotamian script. They twisted and coiled unnaturally, forming patterns that seemed almost alive under the flickering lights of our equipment. At the center of the chamber, beneath layers of dust and time, lay a stone pedestal, its surface etched with the same eerie symbols. Resting upon it was an object that sent a wave of unease through the room, a ring blackened as if scorched by fire, yet untouched by the decay of centuries. One of the researchers reached out, brushing the dirt away, to reveal the ring's full form. The moment his fingers made contact, the temperature in the chamber dropped. It wasn't just a shift in the air, it was a sudden, bone-deep cold that made my breath come out in thick, visible puffs. The silence became suffocating, as if the very walls were holding their breath. I swear in that instant, I heard something. Distant whispers, layered upon one another, speaking in a language I couldn't understand. The researcher yanked his hand back as if burned, his face pale, his eyes wide with something between terror and confusion. None of us spoke. We didn't have to. We all felt it. We weren't alone down there. We should have left. Every instinct told me to walk away, to seal the chamber and pretend we had never found it. But the lure of discovery is a dangerous thing, especially when history is involved. Another researcher, a seasoned archaeologist who had spent decades studying ancient civilizations, decided to document the carvings. He traced them carefully with his fingers, his lips moving as he tried to decipher their meaning. I watched as his expression shifted, first curiosity, then unease. They aren't just decorative," he murmured. "They're instructions." His voice barely carried in the oppressive stillness, but I could hear the tremor beneath his words. Before any of us could ask what he meant, the lights flickered. The electronic hum of our equipment stuttered, then died completely, plunging us into a darkness so thick it felt alive. Panic set in immediately. Someone fumbled for a flashlight, but when the beam cut through the pitch black, it only made things worse. The carvings on the walls, those strange, twisting symbols, were glowing. A deep, pulsating red, like embers buried beneath ash. The whispers returned, louder this time, overlapping in an eerie, rhythmic cadence that made my stomach turn. I pressed my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The sound wasn't coming from around us. It was inside us. One of the assistants screamed, a raw, guttural sound that sent ice through my veins. He dropped to his knees, clutching his head as if something was trying to split it open from within. The ring still sat untouched on the pedestal, but I swear, in the glow of those unnatural symbols, I saw its surface shift, like something inside was stirring. I don't remember who ran first. Maybe it was me, maybe it was all of us at once. But the moment the assistant collapsed, convulsing as if something unseen was gripping him, survival instincts took over. We scrambled toward the narrow passage leading back to the surface, our movements clumsy, frantic. The air was thick, suffocating, pressing down on us like unseen hands. As I turned back for one last glance, I saw the assistant still on the ground, his body rigid, his mouth open in a silent scream. But what paralyzed me wasn't him. It was his shadow. It was wrong. It stretched unnaturally, twisting across the stone floor in ways that defied logic, as if something else was rising from within him. And for the briefest moment, I thought I saw another figure standing beside the pedestal, a towering silhouette, featureless but undeniably there, watching us. We burst into the open air, gasping, blinded by the harsh sunlight. Our guide was waiting for us, his face grim, as if he had already known what we would find. He didn't ask what happened. He only shook his head and said, "You never should have gone down there." The assistant was pulled out last, unconscious but breathing, his pulse erratic. We called for help, but nothing could explain what had happened to him. He never woke up. He remained in a coma for weeks before his body simply gave out. The doctors found no cause, no injury, no illness. It was as if something had drained the life from him. The official reports were vague, an unidentified reaction to an enclosed environment. But we knew better. We had seen what should have remained hidden. We tried to forget. We told ourselves it was just exhaustion, maybe some kind of gas leak affecting our minds. But deep down, we all knew that wasn't true. The project was shut down immediately. No one spoke about what we had seen, and whatever artifacts were retrieved were taken by authorities we didn't recognize. Men who arrived without warning, asked no questions, and left without explanations. The chamber was sealed, buried once again beneath layers of history, as if it had never been touched. But that wasn't the end of it. Strange things started happening to those of us who had been there, not immediately, but over time. Subtle at first, restless nights, whispers at the edge of hearing, the feeling of being watched in an empty room. Then it got worse. One by one, members of our team began to disappear, not in the literal sense, no one went missing. But they changed. The lead archaeologist, the one who first realized the carvings were instructions, quit his career entirely. He isolated himself, refused interviews, and was last seen wandering through Jerusalem's oldest quarters, speaking in a language no one recognized. Another researcher, the one who touched the ring, developed a sudden and violent phobia of darkness. He wouldn't sleep unless every light in his house was on. But that didn't help. He was found weeks later, sitting upright in his chair, eyes wide open, his face frozen in an expression of pure terror. There were no signs of struggle, no cause of death, just the same inexplicable emptiness that had claimed our assistant. I tried to move on. I told myself I was lucky, that I had escaped whatever had taken hold of the others. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The nightmares started soon after we left Jerusalem. At first, they were vague, a presence lurking just beyond the edge of my vision, an overwhelming sense of being watched. Then, they became clearer. I would find myself back in that chamber, standing before the pedestal, the ring still resting. There, but in the dream, I wasn't alone. There was always something behind me, just out of sight, whispering in that same ancient tongue. No matter how fast I turned, I could never see it. The worst part was waking up, Because sometimes, for a few seconds after opening my eyes, the whispers didn't stop. They lingered in the darkness of my room, as if something had followed me out of the dream. I tried everything: therapy, medication, even religious rituals meant to ward off evil. Nothing worked. The presence remained, and then things began to change in my waking life. Objects in my house moved on their own, always small things, a book shifting on a shelf, a chair slightly out of place. But I knew I hadn't touched them. Shadows seemed darker than they should be, stretching in unnatural directions. My reflection in the mirror felt delayed, as if it were watching me before choosing to move. I stopped sleeping. I stopped leaving my house at night. And yet, none of it compared to what happened last month. That was when I finally understood that I had never truly left that chamber, that it had never truly let me go. It happened around 3 a.m. I was sitting in my living room, exhausted but too afraid to close my eyes. The apartment was silent, the kind of silence that feels unnatural, pressing in from all sides. Then, without warning, every light flickered at once. Not the usual power surge, not a quick dimming or a brief outage. The bulbs pulsed on and off, in a slow, deliberate rhythm, as if something was trying to get my attention, and then I heard it, not from a dream, not from my own mind, but from the farthest corner of the room, the whispering. It was the same voice from the chamber, the same layered, distorted murmuring that had haunted me for months, only this time it wasn't distant. It was here. I forced myself to turn my head, already knowing I wouldn't like what I saw. The corner, which had been empty moments before, was no longer just a shadowed space. There was something there, a shape darker than the darkness itself, shifting, watching. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel its gaze, cold and ancient. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to move, to run, but my body wouldn't respond. And then, for the first time, I understood the whispers. Just a few words, a command, a warning, or maybe an invitation. I don't remember how long I sat there, paralyzed. Time stopped making sense. My body was frozen, but my mind was screaming, every instinct telling me to flee. And yet I couldn't, not because something was physically holding me down, but because some part of me, some deep, primal part, understood that movement would be a mistake. It was watching, waiting. The whispers grew louder, not coming from its direction, but from inside my own head, overlapping, layering over themselves until they weren't whispers at all. They were thoughts, my thoughts, but they weren't mine. They spoke of things I shouldn't know, things no human should ever know. Names I had never heard before but somehow recognized. A place beneath the temple, deeper than any excavation had ever gone. A place where something had been sealed long before Solomon's time. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The lights snapped back to normal. The whispers vanished. The presence was gone. But something was different. I could still feel it, just beyond the edge of my awareness. The air in the room was thick, heavy with something unseen but undeniably real. When I finally found the strength to move, my entire body ached, as if I had been holding my breath for hours. My hands were shaking, my pulse was erratic, and that was when I saw it. Sitting on the table in front of me, where there had been nothing before. A small object, ancient and blackened, as if scorched by fire. A ring. I couldn't breathe. My mind refused to accept what I was seeing. That ring, the ring, had been left behind in that chamber. I had never touched it. None of us had taken it. And yet here it was, resting just inches away from me, as if it had always been there. The air around it seemed heavier, charged with something unseen but undeniably present. My first instinct was to run, to get as far away from it as possible. But another part of me, a quieter but far more dangerous voice, whispered something else. Pick it up. I don't know if the thought was my own. It didn't feel like it. My hand trembled as I reached for it, hovering just above its surface. The moment my fingers brushed against the metal, a searing heat shot through my arm. Not burning, something deeper, something that crawled beneath my skin like liquid fire. Images flooded my mind, flickering visions of things I couldn't comprehend. A vast structure, buried beneath the temple ruins, carvings older than any civilization, spiraling into endless corridors of darkness. And at the center of it all, something waiting, something that had been calling for a very, very long time. I yanked my hand back, gasping for air as if I'd been drowning. The ring sat motionless, cold and lifeless, as if nothing had happened. But I knew the truth. Something had changed. A connection had been made. And as much as I wanted to believe I could ignore it, that I could walk away and pretend none of this had ever happened, I knew deep down that wasn't possible, because the whispers had returned, not distant anymore, not in my dreams. They were here, now, all around me. And this time, they weren't just speaking, they were waiting for an answer. I didn't sleep that night, I couldn't. The ring remained on the table, untouched, but it didn't need to move to remind me of its presence. It was in the air, in my bones, in my thoughts. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw things, places, that no human was ever meant to see. A city without light, built from stone that pulsed like living flesh. Figures moving through the darkness, shifting in ways that defied logic. A throne, impossibly vast, carved with symbols that I somehow understood, though I had never seen them before. The words whispered through my mind, pulling me towards something ancient and hungry. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the ring, listening to those voices grow louder. But at some point I realized something terrifying. They weren't just speaking anymore, they were laughing. I don't know why I did what I did next. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was sheer desperation. I grabbed the ring, my fingers wrapping tightly around the scorched metal, and I threw it into the fire. The moment it hit the flames, the entire room shook. A sound erupted from nowhere and everywhere at once, a deafening, inhuman wail, so loud that I clamped my hands over my ears, my vision blurring from the sheer force of it. The walls trembled, the lights exploded in a shower of sparks. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. Silence. Utter, suffocating silence. When I looked into the fire, the ring was gone, not melted, not damaged, just vanished. And for the first time in months, the whispers stopped. For weeks I waited for something to happen, for the whispers to return, for the shadows to move again. But nothing did. The house was silent. My reflection moved when I moved. The nightmares faded. It was as if whatever had been attached to me had finally let go. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had made a mistake, that I hadn't destroyed anything, only sent it somewhere else. I started researching, obsessively digging through ancient texts, cross-referencing obscure passages from sources that barely even existed in mainstream history. And the more I found, the more I understood. The ring had never been just an artifact. It was a key, a seal, something meant to bind. And when I cast it into the flames, I hadn't purified it. I had released it. I haven't gone back to Jerusalem. I don't think I ever will. The others who were with me that day are either gone or refuse to speak about it. No records of our excavation remain. It's as if the entire event was erased from history, buried just as deeply as the chamber itself. But I know the truth. I know what we found, and I know that somewhere, out there, it is still waiting. Maybe for someone else to find it, maybe for me, maybe even now as I write this, it's already watching. Because sometimes, in the dead of night, when the world is silent and my mind drifts towards sleep, I swear, just for a second, I hear it, that whisper, that laugh, a reminder that some things were never meant to be uncovered, and that once you've heard the call, it never truly lets you go. I tried to believe that it was over, that by casting the ring into the fire, I had severed whatever had latched onto me, but deep down, I knew better. The silence wasn't relief, it was waiting, and it didn't take long before the signs returned. It started subtly, flickers in my peripheral vision, the sensation of something just behind me. When I stood in front of a mirror, my reflection began to feel wrong, not delayed, not distorted, just different, like a version of me that wasn't entirely my own. And then came the dreams again, more vivid than before. Only this time, they weren't visions of the chamber or the temple. They were places I didn't recognize, landscapes that felt ancient, yet untouched by time. But the worst part, I wasn't just seeing them, I was there. One night, I woke up standing outside my apartment building. I had no memory of leaving my bed, no recollection of unlocking the door or stepping out into the cold air. I was barefoot, my hands trembling, and my body felt like it had been walking for hours. The street was empty, silent, but something in the distance, something just beyond my line of sight, was watching. I could feel it, the same oppressive presence from the chamber, the same weight in the air. My skin crawled with the certainty that if I turned my head too fast, I would see something I wasn't meant to see. That was the night I stopped sleeping entirely. Desperation led me to seek help in places I never would have considered before. I found a man, an old scholar who specialized in forbidden texts, a man who spoke in riddles but seemed to understand what I was experiencing without me needing to explain. When I told him about the ring, his face paled. He whispered something in a language I didn't recognize, then looked me in the eyes and said, "You should never have touched it." I asked him what it was, what we had uncovered beneath the ruins of Solomon's temple. He hesitated, as if saying it aloud might make it more real. And then he told me, "Not all wisdom comes from God." That sentence still haunts me. It confirmed what I had feared since the moment we entered that hidden chamber. Solomon was known for his wisdom, but wisdom can be a double-edged sword. The knowledge he sought, the power he wielded, it didn't all come from divine blessing. Some things were learned from something else, and some of those things should never be spoken, never be read, never be uncovered. I left the scholar's house with more questions than answers, but one thing was clear: I had been marked. The excavation wasn't just an archaeological mistake, it was an invitation, and I had answered it without even knowing. I don't know how much longer I can keep this to myself. Even as I write this, I feel the weight of something unseen pressing against my thoughts, twisting the air around me. I hear the whispers again, not in the distance, not in my mind, but here, in the room. The presence has returned, closer than ever. I can see its shadow moving even when the light stays still. I don't know what it wants. Or maybe I do. Maybe it's been telling me all along, and I've just been too afraid to listen. If I stop writing, if this is my last message, know that some doors should never be opened, some secrets should remain buried. And if you ever find yourself beneath the ruins of Solomon's temple and you see something that shouldn't be there, walk away. No matter what it promises, no matter what it offers. Walk away before it sees you too. I tried to believe that it was over, that by casting the ring into the fire, I had severed whatever had latched onto me, but deep down I knew better. The silence wasn't relief, it was waiting, and it didn't take long before the signs returned. It started subtly, flickers in my peripheral vision, the sensation of something just behind me. When I stood in front of a mirror, my reflection began to feel wrong, not delayed, not distorted, just different, like a version of me that wasn't entirely my own. And then came the dreams again, more vivid than before. Only this time, they weren't visions of the chamber or the temple. They were places I didn't recognize, landscapes that felt ancient, yet untouched by time. But the worst part, I wasn't just seeing them, I was there. One night, I woke up standing outside my apartment building. I had no memory of leaving my bed, no recollection of unlocking the door or stepping out into the cold air. I was barefoot, my hands trembling, and my body felt like it had been walking for hours. The street was empty, silent, but something in the distance, something just beyond my line of sight, was watching. I could feel it, the same oppressive presence from the chamber, the same weight in the air. My skin crawled with the certainty that if I turned my head too fast, I would see something I wasn't meant to see. That was the night I stopped sleeping entirely. Desperation led me to seek help in places I never would have considered before. I found a man, an old scholar who specialized in forbidden texts, a man who spoke in riddles but seemed to understand what I was experiencing without me needing to explain. When I told him about the ring, his face paled. He whispered something in a language I didn't recognize, then looked me in the eyes and said, "You should never have touched it." I asked him what it was, what we had uncovered beneath the ruins of Solomon's temple. He hesitated, as if saying it aloud might make it more real. And then he told me, "Not all wisdom comes from God." That sentence still haunts me. It confirmed what I had feared since the moment we entered that hidden chamber. Solomon was known for his wisdom, but wisdom can be a double-edged sword. The knowledge he sought, the power he wielded, it didn't all come from divine blessing. Some things were learned from something else, and some of those things should never be spoken, never be read, never be uncovered. I left the scholar's house with more questions than answers, but one thing was clear: I had been marked. The excavation wasn't just an archaeological mistake, it was an invitation, and I had answered it without even knowing. I don't know how much longer I can keep this to myself. Even as I write this, I feel the weight of something unseen pressing against my thoughts, twisting the air around me. I hear the whispers again, not in the distance, not in my mind, but here, in the room. The presence has returned, closer than ever. I can see its shadow moving even when the light stays still. I don't know what it wants. Or maybe I do. Maybe it's been telling me all along, and I've just been too afraid to listen. If I stop writing, if this is my last message, know that some doors should never be opened, some secrets should remain buried. And if you ever find yourself beneath the ruins of Solomon's temple, and you see something that shouldn't be there, walk away. No matter what it promises, no matter what it offers. Walk away before it sees you, too. I don't know how long I have. The whispers aren't just in my head anymore. They are in the walls, in the air, in the silence between my breaths. The lights in my apartment flicker in that same slow rhythm, like something unseen is breathing with me, waiting for the right moment. My reflection lingers half a second too long. When I move, my own shadow twists in ways it shouldn't. I feel like I'm standing on the edge of something vast and endless, a darkness that isn't just empty, but full of something waiting, watching. And now, I think I finally understand what it has been whispering all along. It wasn't just calling to me, it was preparing me. I was never meant to escape that chamber. None of us were. It let us leave because it wanted us to carry it with us, to spread whatever was sealed away long ago. And now, as I sit here unable to move, unable to breathe without feeling it pressing down on me, I realize I was never the one searching for answers. It was. And now that it has them, it doesn't need me anymore. The lights just went out. The whispers have stopped. I think it's finally here.